Broadcasting live from Youngville, North Carolina and Ontario, Canada, this is Got Mead Live, a weekly show where Vicky Rowe and AJ Araments bring you the mead news, meadery info, and mead-making discussions from all over, talking with mead makers, mead owners, industry mavens, and influencers. This is Got Mead Live, a weekly podcast about mead and the people who love it and where the mead world is going. And now here are your hosts, Got Mead owner Vicky Rowe and mead and wine maker AJ Araments.
Live from the den of the puppies of the apocalypse, the bunny pen in Ottawa, Canada, and Ryan's pad in Denver, it's Got Mead Live. Welcome to the show. We are without Manny, who had to work tonight, and Hamish is on holiday with his family, so they're out having fun. But welcome to the show. Our guest tonight is Ryan, who, of course, as you all know, is also a host. But Ryan's going to be talking about pairing yeast with your meads. If you haven't already, go download a copy of the 2018 Scott Labs Yeast Handbook. The link is in the show page for this episode. If you're on the chat, it's also linked in the chat at the beginning of tonight's chat. So, because there's going to be homework, we'll be testing, and you will be asked. So you need to have the book handy.
It's not loading for me.
Yeah. So I wanted to just put a thank you very much out there to the folks that renewed and joined up to become patrons this week. Thank you very much. Every little bit helps keep things moving and grooving and keeping us online. So very much appreciated. If you haven't already, if you listen to the show and you haven't considered becoming a patron, please think about doing so. It's only $30 a year. We put you into the patron group on the Got Mead forums, and there's a whole bunch of award-winning recipes in there. We've got a patron group on Facebook that you get into, and your money goes to support the show, the site, and everything that Got Mead does to promote mead and help people learn more about making mead. So if you think Got Mead's helping, please, give a thought to it. And again, thank you so much to those who joined and those who renewed in the last week. If you want to listen to us live, obviously, you can go catch us at gotmead.com. Just click Got Mead Live Radio Show. There's a player on that page that'll play us live when we're live, and it'll play whatever the most recent show is if we're not. And you can get every other episode back to the beginning there as well. If you prefer to listen to us after the fact, can't make it because of work, what have you, you can catch us on Spreaker, iTunes, SoundCloud, TuneIn, and Stitcher, as well as on gotmead.com. Just search Got Mead Live. Replays are all the way back to the beginning on all of those things. You can find us online at gotmead.com, of course. On Facebook, we are gotmead.com/gotmead, and our group is facebook.com/groups/gotmead. Twitter, we are at gotmeadnow. Feel free to tweet us. If you want to send us questions or suggestions on people you'd like to see us have on the show, just put your mouse on gotmead.com over Got Mead Live Radio Show. There'll be a drop-down where you can fill out a form and ask us any questions or give us any suggestions for the show. If Skype is cooperating, and it hasn't been recently, you can call us at 803-443-MEAD. That's 803-443-6323. I'll be watching to see if calls are coming in. And if you're in the chat and you'd like to call in during the show to chat with Ryan, feel free to drop me your phone number in the chat, and I can bring you in. It'll take a minute, but I can bring you into the show manually. All right, so what are we drinking?
Well, I got a bottle of Ryan's Boucher at the PreMajor Cup, and I just cracked it open. And Ryan, this is fucking fantastic.
I was just thinking the other day, how long does it take you to get around to a bottle of mead?
A very, very long time, Ryan. You should know this by now. I still have stuff from the last PreMajor Cup that I haven't drunk yet.
Yeah, I drank Ryan's mead forever ago.
Oh, it smells like a cross between maple and marshmallows or something.
Oh my God.
Yeah, there's actually, that's probably the most complex mead that I've ever made, as far as, or maybe second most complex as far as different different adjuncts that I added to that. I'm glad that you like it. What especially stands out as unique to it?
Well, the aroma is fantastic for one.
Mm-hmm.
The sweetness level is
Go ahead.
The sweetness level is just about where I'd want it to be.
Right.
There's a little bit of a bitterness that lingers in the back of that tongue that prevents it from being too sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, really, really pleasant.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words.
It's got a little bit of an alcohol hot to it. It feels like it might be a little bit strong, but I don't know what. Do you know what percentage was this?
No, it's probably 17 or so.
Okay, well that's why it tastes like
yeah,
that.
Drink
then.
it slowly.
Yeah. Okay then.
Vicky knows from drinking my Mango Man a while back.
Oh yeah, yeah. I got drunk that show.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Well then, I'm gonna put this down because I gotta work after the show.
Yeah. I was loopy by the end of that episode.
It happens sometimes.
I have learned now. I get any more mead from Ryan, and I'm going to be a lot more judicious about how I drink it.
Well, I think kind of two things. I don't make a lot of things that's not quite as strong as what I once did. I suspect probably a lot of us when we first get started, maybe make the higher end alcohols just because we can or whatever.
Oh, guilty as charged.
Yeah, I know for sure. And I still make a lot of sacks. But I've also certainly grown into some other, places that I didn't once enjoy. In fact, I've noticed over time that I've just continued to get drier and drier as I quote mature.
I'm still waiting for that to happen for me.
Right? Yeah. There's no. You don't have to be ashamed of what you like. You like what you like, and so be it. Drink it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing, and that's what's so interesting about judging, because I like what I like, and that's what I drink. And some of the stuff that I drink would maybe not do as well in judging as as something else that maybe I don't like as much. But it's weird because that's the hardest thing in judging, and it took me years to get to where I can mostly do it. I don't think anybody's 100% of judging it against the style as opposed to, gosh, I really like this,
Really?
Well,
right.
I learned a lot about that type of thing when I was doing my grape beer experiment, trying to figure out what kind of beer I like. And so I was drinking a lot of different things and trying to pick out why I didn't like something and if there was anything in there that I did like, if the thing that I didn't like was not there. So that's, just trying a lot of different things and looking for the good things in it is, I guess, a way of expanding your objectivity when it comes to your personal tastes.
Oh, yeah. I'll try almost anything.
And I think if we can, yeah. I think, too, it's important if we look at what was declared and then judge it accordingly. In other words, put our own biases aside and, was this made well? Is it in balance? Does it have any flaws, minor or major? And
does it taste like what they say it's supposed to taste like?
Exactly. I remember the first time that I tasted a peanut butter and jelly mead. I thought, you kind of think, man, that's probably just a novelty. And I don't know that I would buy very many bottles of a peanut butter and jelly mead, but I was quite surprised. It tasted exactly like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I was like, wow, they did a really, really good job of doing this.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah, like the banana bread meads.
Oh my God, that was so
right.
good.
Or I had a banana bread beer, and I'm like, I don't even really like banana bread unless it's loaded with chocolate chips, and this is amazing,
Yeah. Well, so you need to make a banana bread mead with chocolate chips. Try saying that 3 times.
After a glass or two.
Yeah. After a glass or two of Brian's mead, yeah.
Maybe what I'll do is just blend that banana wine that I made years and years ago that friggin' refuses to clear. Just put cocoa in it and hope that clears it up.
There you go.
I've sometimes just mixed some different traditionals that wouldn't clear, and just by pairing, some different pieces in there, it's somehow I guess the plus and minus is made up and weigh enough to fall out or something. But it's kind of weird sometimes how just the least expecting thing will work to make a mead clear sometimes.
Yeah, flocculation is a really, really weird thing, and I love that that's a technical term.
Yeah, that's a fun word to say.
And not to be confused with something else. So.
Flock. Oh, fuck off.
Oh, no. Come on, we're NC-17, but
So-
let's not really.
And I'm not
So,
really even drinking yet, God.
Yeah.
Oh,
What are
boy.
you drinking,
It's been a
Ryan?
week.
My friend here in Denver, Deborah, she owns Queen Bee Brews. I'm actually drinking one of her fabulous meads. It's called Magdalena. It's a mesquite blossom mead with hatch green chilies.
Oh, I tried that one.
And it's wonderful. I really like it. It's very nice. It's pretty dry, and yet it has all the pieces and parts that you want, and it really does a great job of showcasing the hatch green chilies. And I just like how well she's captured that essence of the green chili. I guess you go into any Mexican restaurant, and they're probably the thing they want to, their pride and joy, if they can do it well, would be their green chili. And this is just a wonderful representation of that for sure.
I remember trying that when I was over there when I was in Denver last, and it was really well put together. It really was. A little dry for my personal taste, but it was really well constructed.
Was that the meadery we visited?
Mm-hmm. That's the one.
Okay.
You guys went the day after Mazur, right?
Yeah, and the day off that we had.
Sunday on your way home?
Yeah, well, Sunday was our day off.
After driving Thomas to the airport, I think.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. We usually have, and I'm sure we'll do it again this year, we have a PreMajor Cup party. And so the people that get into Denver on Sunday afternoon or whatever, we invite all the people that's coming in early, and we get together there, and it's pretty crazy. We pound a lot of meat for sure. Bring some food, and it's good fun to try to be a host for the people that get in there early and don't know what to do with their time. It's like, come on over and party with us.
Yeah, if I hadn't been so damn beat, I would have been down there when last year.
Yeah.
God, I was whooped though.
And it just gets worse as time.
Well, yeah. I mean, this last year was unusual though, because I had whatever the hell was going on with my breathing, and that was a big thing of it. Is I just couldn't breathe. I'm not.
How is that, by the way? No.
Oh, it's a lot better. I mean, they've got me on asthma medication basically, and I managed to survive 2 unbelievably long trips to and from Australia with no real problems. I mean, I was a little short of breath, but nothing like what it was when I flew to Denver last spring. So. Right.
Yeah. Well, good. I hope it keeps going in the right direction.
You and me both. So yeah, I'm not worrying about it too much. With any luck, it should be fine this time. But But yeah, I'm tipping.
So what
back.
are you drinking, Vicki?
I'm tipping back a bottle of B Nectar's The Dude's Rug, man. It's a cider with tea and chai spices, and it's really good. It's got a spicy cidery nose, and when you drink it, it's this nice apple flavor with the tannins from the tea, and then there's cinnamon and ginger and cloves, and it's got a nice, smooth, sort of medium-length finish. It's really nice.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah. So.
Sounds wonderful.
It is. It's good. I just, I've got like two crates of mead sitting in the dining room, and I just go in there and start rooting through them, going, "Oh, this looks good."
I hear you.
Actually, I'd picked this one out before I realized it was Ryan on this week.
Did you really?
Oh, so just by chance, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. My son actually just absolutely loves that. He thinks it's the greatest, and I think some people really like it, and then I could also see where it might not be so appealing to others too.
Oh, the aroma's just worth it.
Yeah, you know what I find difficult. I'm not at all patting myself on the back, because I know that a lot of other mead makers feel the same, at least in regards to sending entries into competitions. And Pete was the one who taught me this, and I'm at the place now, fortunately, where I'm finding that this is coming more often than. Well, I guess it's a good thing, and it's also a little bit of a bummer when you're thinking about wanting to enter your best meads into a competition, I think that mini meads, and a lot of people would agree with this, that mini meads are very outstanding. They have a boatload of complexity and extremely well made, and yet because they're not like a 100-pound 2x4 smashing somebody between the eyes, I think it's a common notion that those types of meads don't do so well in the competitions because they might fly under the radar, and I'm certainly not judging, one's judge against another, but I think that it takes a kind of a refined palate to sometimes notice all the nuance and intricacies of certain meads that other people might just kind of gloss right over because it's not knocking them off their chair. And
yeah,
I'm finding this year that I've had a lot that I'm going, and I'm not saying, "Ooh, look at me" or anything, but both my boy Nathan and I, we both say, "This is too good to send into a competition because it's going to get overlooked." And I guess that's a good thing to have, but it's also kind of a double-edged sword if you're trying to compete, as I am, for the Mead Maker of the Year award. Then you want to have all kinds of nice things you can send in. And
yeah, I saw your lineup on Facebook the other day of what am I going to send in.
Right. Yeah. I don't think I'll play the game next year. It's makes for a long season. It's a lot of energy, and a lot of money is spent to compete, and it's turned into a long season with a lot of work involved. That I don't know that I'll do it again next year. Probably not.
Yeah. That's it. Competition isn't for everybody. I mean, I've never felt drawn to compete.
Same.
Mainly just because I'm just not really a competitor. I wasn't in sports much either. I mean, the only competition stuff I did was basketball in high school because everybody was doing it, and I was pretty bad at it. And skiing, ski team, and I did ski team not to compete so much as because it got me out of school to go ski. So and free rides to the ski area, so I mean, I did it more just because it got me skiing more, and I love to ski. Not, I liked it when I won, but I wasn't like heartbroken when I didn't or anything. I'm not a big competitor. It's just not in my nature.
I tend to compete more against myself than other people, and
well, which is another reason. That's why you'll never see my meads in competition, because they're never good enough.
Yeah, I know. I think a lot of us are cursed with that. It's fun though, because it's in some ways it's like we're playing a friendly competitive game of cards where it's a bunch of buddies getting together, and nobody probably truly cares who really wins, but
we all kind of want to see each other win, eh?
Well, for sure. Yeah. That's right. So it's more of a social thing than, I really don't, maybe this is part of my competitiveness that comes out. Well, Lance Armstrong says the only thing that counts is first place. Second place is the first place loser. And so I think if you come in anything less than first, it's going to go, well, I did okay, or I did, pretty good, depending on what your intentions or hopes were to start with. But I don't know. That'll mean anything next year for sure. Other than just it was fun to play against your friends.
Yeah.
Not last is pretty much my standard, so
I've gotten a lot less competitive as I've gotten older. I'm an old man now, and I'm still pretty competitive, but like I said, I compete more against myself than other people. Anyway, for our listeners out there, hi, welcome to our show. I hope that you're either busy now scrambling to download the Scott's Laboratories Handbook. Hopefully you've already done that. I'm still amazed on a weekly basis of how many people don't seem to realize this wonderful resource that we have available on the internet as a PDF, and you can also there's a number in there probably on the back page of the Contact Us. You can call the people at Scott's Labs, and they will mail you a free handbook. And I've certainly been influenced by some of our grandfathers and peers in the mead making renaissance, so to speak. But I can tell you, I learned an awful lot the old-fashioned way by just old-fashioned reading and studying and learning. And I spent hours and hours in this handbook, almost to the point where, you know, sometimes at work I'll get on just for a minute while I'm taking a break on Facebook or whatever, and I can refer people to, well, I think it's on like page 36 or 38, and it talks about this. And I just really want to encourage you all. I lightly call this the Fermentation Bible. And shame on you if you think that because this is, quote, a wine handbook, that it doesn't pertain to me. That's not at all the case, and nor is if it was a beer book. We all use the same critters, and they all perform more or less the same. Certainly as we get better in being a yeast cowboy, so to speak, we learn how to sometimes manipulate the yeast to do things that we want based on maybe our rate of food that we introduce to them or temperatures or whatnot. But really, I think if you want to say, well, that's wine and this is beer and we do mead, I think having a closed mind like that's going to really cut you short of a lot of things that we can use. It's almost we're twin sons of a different mother or something along that nature. So get this handbook on your computer, call and ask for the actual hard, semi-hard paperback catalog so you can carry it around and study it and learn from it. One of the things that I find are truly incredible is that the very first place that we have an ability to put our influence in a mead is based on our yeast selection. And I really, when I hear that somebody's only used one mead their entire life, used one yeast strain their entire life, and it's almost always 71B because that's what Ken promoted in his book so well. And I've heard from friends of Ken's that he stuck to that strain for a very long time and was quite resistant to try other strains. But anyway, my point is this: if you only use one or maybe two strains of yeast, that's almost as boring as getting up every morning and eating the same exact damn thing for breakfast for your entire life. It's a wonderful thing to start to branch out and to learn different yeast strains and what you can count on them to bring to the table in your compilation, your building of a mead. Mead is really made. A good mead is made on a piece of paper at your kitchen table before you even mix up your star sand. And hopefully, as we get better in mead making, we become what I call a liquid chef. We've learned how to put together all these different pieces, and I understand we all start at a place, probably most of us start where we need a recipe, but I'm really wanting to encourage everyone, as are many, many, many other people out there, that making mead is far greater than just reading a recipe. And one of the coolest things that we can do is begin to learn of our little worker horses here and learn how to treat them well, which I'm sure by now there's such an abundance of science that I would expect anybody should be able to make meads without major flaws, and even in short order be able to make meads without minor flaws, with all the good information that's out there nowadays. Once we get to that place, then I think it's a good place to pick up and start to learn how to pick a yeast and what parameters we use to kind of guide us in a certain direction or two. And one of the things that I want to do here tonight, I'm not going to give you a list where you can write down and say, okay, I want to make a sweet mead, a traditional, use this yeast, because it's more than that. I don't want to make it so that I don't want to cut it short by just giving you a list of another page in your recipe book that you go and say, okay, I'm going to use this yeast because it's good for a dry traditional.
It's like in school, you learn more if you work for your answers.
That's right. That's right. And honestly, the people that are really great mead makers work very hard at becoming great mead makers. And they make a lot of A/B tests where they're comparing one thing to the other. And I don't think I think we're all probably pretty close to the same. We might arrive at different destinations with a little bit different journey. But I think we've all worked very hard to learn how to pick and choose the different pieces to where at some point, hopefully, you're going to all know and understand at least a quiver, a handful of 10 or 15 different yeast strains that you'll just know right off the top of your head. Oh, I like this yeast strain because it does this and this and that. And that would work very well with my honey variety that I'm going to use. And then secondly, you want to consider your different adjuncts, be them spices or fruits or combinations. But I really think the beginning to all of this is to learn how to pair your yeast strain so that it supports what you find naturally in the honey. On occasion, I'll take a new mead maker and if they'll agree to a few stipulations, I'll dedicate my time and energy to bring them up and to teach them how to make good meads. And I know there's a lot of other different ways to skin a cat, but if I'm going to give away my free time and energy and knowledge, I want somebody to agree that they'll follow me until we get to a certain point, and then after we get there, it's like, all right, buddy, you're all good now. You can go, it's time to jump out of the nest and go fly on your own. But I always encourage everybody to say, this is what we're going to do if you want to learn to make mead the way I want to teach it. I'm going to teach you to make a good traditional. And only once we can consistently make a good traditional, then we can move on to some mellow mills. And then after we do that well and understand a few things, now we can move on to using spices and herbs. But when you learn to make a good traditional, you're raising the bar for every other mead that you can make. And so one of the very first things that we need to learn to do, which is what I'm going to initially spend some time on here right now, and then once we kind of got a good feeling for that, we'll move on to considering some other pieces. But I think that the utmost importance in picking a yeast strain, and I'm not going to tell you that there's just one yeast strain that will work for one type of honey. That's absolutely not true, and that's what's such a wonderful thing about mead. You could pick 5 or 6 or 8 different strains that would end up working perfect with what you're making. But I can also tell you, just as sure as there's some strains that work incredibly well with a particular honey, because I'm constantly all the time I'll buy a new honey that I haven't ever used before, or I'll be using a honey that I'm very familiar with, but I just haven't tried some different strains of yeast. Always before if I buy a brand new 5-gallon bucket of something that I've never used before, the first thing I'll sit down and do is I go, okay, I want to learn how to make this the very best traditional I can. Because if I learn the best yeast strain, or maybe a combination, and we'll talk about combining them here in a little bit as well, but I'm trying to set the standard here, trying to lay out the table, so to speak. If we can pick the right strain that will support and make that honey shine as well as it can, versus picking the wrong strain and getting off on the wrong foot from the very beginning, we have a huge head start if we know what yeast strain or combinations will make the honey truly shine. Once we know that, we now know that anything that we add, we know that the first and largest component that we need to first understand and make work is the yeast-honey marriage between the two. And so I'm going to tell you of system. I'm not much of a system guy. I'm really a fly-by-my-pants guy, but I fly by my pants quite naturally. But I do that with an educated understanding of what I want to do. In other words, it's not just blind luck or blind faith that I'll just slap some stuff together and see if it happens out. I'm just one of those guys that I don't have to have a whole lot of set parameters, and I'm good with that. But I know a lot of people out there don't function that way. And so I want to help you guys specifically, because I think you might struggle with more in this aspect than the artsy people that are they don't need all the parameters to make them feel comfortable, so that they don't need as much help. But in any case, let's start to look at this, and I'm going to show you how to use this handbook so that at the end of the day, by the time we go to bed tonight, and then hopefully in the next few days, you guys will actually sit down and do what I'm going to teach you to do tonight in person in your book. And I'm talking about scribbling in your book, color coding in your book, making signs and signals in your book, so that then once you have everything color coded and you have these different signs and symbols, now you look at a honey and you go, okay, this honey is either this or that or the other thing. I want to present this particular honey, and I want to really showcase this single aspect about the honey, or maybe a couple different aspects. Once you pick the aspect in the honey that you want to showcase, and you'll understand exactly what I mean here in 5 more minutes, so bear with me. I probably chat too long at times. Once you know what's in your honey, you can easily go into your book then and right away start to be able to point at different yeast strains to consider. And if we do this the way that I'm going to teach you, it should work. That any of the ones that you consider would probably work quite well. Of course, if you really want to find out what works the best, look at 3 that you're considering. Well, maybe yeast A, B, and C, those all might work. For you to really truly know, you need to make a batch with A, B, and C, all the same, except for your different yeast strain. And you might find that they all 3 are very nice and they work, but they're 3 that are very different, or maybe not so different. But yeast, at least if you then know in your head, in your understanding of how they're different, that will then become clearer to you later down the road when you're considering those strains again. You'll go, oh, well, I know this guy, and this is what he's proven to make for me every time I've used him. And so things will become clearer over time. But the system we're going to do in the book will at least get you started so that you're walking in the right direction and you're pointing your gun at the right parts and pieces. So, and also, you guys that have questions, you people that are bold enough to jump in and either call up or get on, however you can communicate with Vicki on the back side of the show, so to speak. We want you guys to call in. Okay, very good. I would love for you guys, if somebody got on Skype and we were talking to you one-on-one and walking through doing this with one of your selections. I very much would prefer. Go ahead.
That said, if somebody does want to do a one-on-one with Ryan with a particular idea they're chasing, shoot me your phone number over chat, and I'll call you up and bring you into the call. So we do have a few questions piled up so far.
Okay. I've said quite a lot without saying anything specific, and so we'll take those questions in just a few minutes after I kind of laid down the very first little piece of parameters that we're going to learn to deal with, okay? So, as you guys know, the most amazing thing about making mead is we have, like an artist, we can take all the different colors of the color wheel, and then we can blend them together to make whatever painting we want to make. So we can have a painting that's bright and warm colors and inviting. We can have something that's very dark and brooding, or something that's evil and fearful, or we can have all these different pieces and parts. Making mead is the same way. I don't know if there must be, 400 different types of honey out there, right? And I think I've read that somewhere, but and maybe that's not true, but I know without a doubt, if you looked at all the different wildflower honeys that can be brought to the table, there's trillions of those, right? So when we look at all the different honeys that we have available to us, and then you were to pair them with maybe, I don't know, 300 or 400 different yeasts, really a mathematician could show us that our opportunity, our variables that we can use it's mind-boggling how big they are. And so I like to look at making a traditional as putting up a canvas on the easel. And the canvas might be white, or it might be off-white, or it might be sage green, it might be lilac purple, it might be ruby red, but at least we can start with the canvas, and then from there we can pick the other different shades of color to really represent and to paint a picture of what we want our mouth to see, if that makes sense. So the very first thing we do is, when we think about honey, I like to divide them into different categories of honey. And to keep it simple, tonight we're just going to divide them into 4 different categories. And I hope you guys have some paper and a pencil so that you can come back to this later. But I think it's safe to say that if we looked at any honey that you could bring to the table, we either have a honey that's floral. Floral is one category. Our second category would be fruity. We could break that down into different types of fruits, right? Like stone fruit, or citrus fruits, tropical fruits. But in any case, we have floral, fruity, we have spicy, and then lastly, I like to say that we have a savory category. What is savory? That's the ones that aren't floral, fruity, and spicy.
Umami meads.
And so you can right away, I think you can think of savory honeys. It would be buckwheat, avocado. Well, and one thing I want you to make sure that you understand as well, that you might look at one honey and it could go in floral, but it could also go in fruity, couldn't it? You could look at something that would be savory and spicy. So I'm not saying that any one honey varietal will fall only in one category, but what I am saying is, if you want to pick what category, let's say that you've got all right, let's go with, and I'm just pulling something out of my hat, a blueberry blossom honey. That's very citrusy, but it's also very floral, and it's very fruity. And sometimes it's also got a spicy component to it. So what I would like to then say is, if you're looking at this honey, first determine what of the 4 different categories it goes into, and then put it in that category. Okay? And let's just pretend you find something that's both fruity and floral. Pick one that's going to be your primary thing that you want to bolster, you want to put the spotlight on, and be that either then fruity or floral, and then have the other piece be your, I like to think sometimes of it as we're making a cast of movie stars in a movie. We've got the main, and I wished I knew the different, we've got a supporting cast member, we've got the prima donna, we've got the secondary prima donna, and so forth. So pick who's going to be your primary star in the show. Is that going to be fruity, floral, spicy, or savory? And then if you want to pick a secondary person, or just stop there at the primary. So that's a very simple way of taking a honey and saying, I like to think that this honey is spicy because I get a lot of spices in there. One of the things that come to mind is a Tupelo. Tupelo's got a lot of nice spicy components to it. But the amazing thing about Tupelo is also it's very floral and it's also very fruity, isn't it? So it's hard when you go, okay, I've got all three of those in there. You have to think about what piece out of that honey do I want to really showcase as the primary thing that I want to bring to the table. And so you can make your choice. And so right now we're going to stop about how to determine which honey I'm using or which component, I like to call them fractions, which fraction of the honey you want to showcase. All right, so now put that down and we're going to move into the book. The handbook, the Bible. And for those of you that have the Bible either on your computers or in your hand, if you go to page 12, that's where we start with the premium yeast strains. And so we have all these different strains. It tells about where it was developed, maybe when it was developed, but more importantly, the thing that we mostly care about, is we care about the different fractions that this yeast will bring to the table on its own accord. For instance, let's go over to page 13 in the handbook, and let's look at the yeast strain BA11. And I'll give you guys a minute that are scurrying around to get there. We're looking for yeast strain BA11. It's on page 13.
I think that might have been the yeast that came in my first wine kit.
Was it a white wine kit? Was it floral and fruity?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
It was
right.
it was a red wine. I think it was a raspberry merlot or something like that. So you were adding a fruit pack. But I've never found that yeast since.
Oh, so perfect. That's a great segue to something I probably would have thought about. I think you can buy just about. I don't know if I've ever not been able to buy a yeast that I wanted to buy from More Wine. I just go to More Wine, and that's where I buy my yeast. And I don't think I've ever asked them for something that I was looking for that they did not have. So now I'm going to assume you guys got to the BA11, and so we're going to read here. We'll skip some of it. We're going to go down to it promotes a clean aromatic characteristics. So, right, let's stop right there. It's aromatic. That's important because a mead without a good nose leaves you wanting more nose, doesn't it? You go, I wish I could smell this better. And that's always been a frustration of mine, or it was before I started to learn what I could differently or different pieces that I could add that would increase my aromatics. But right here it tells me that just using this yeast strain alone will give me more aromatics. And I love this, here's the second part, it intensifies mouthfeel. That generally means it feels very lush, very thick, and very heavy with lots of volume. And so it's heavy and lush in your mouth, and instead of being thin and watered down, it's very big. It's very viscous. And then it also says that so it intensifies mouthfeel and lingering flavors in white or sparkling base wines. So it adds to the tail aspect of tasting a mead. It gives you a long tailing finish. A tail, we call it a tail or a finish. So go back now. It's aromatic. It intensifies mouthfeel. It gives you a lingering finish. Now, if we go down the next line, it says Lalvin BA11 can encourage, and this is important, fresh aromas of tropical fruit, cream, vanilla, and spice in relatively neutral wine grape varieties. Now, one thing we need to know and understand is that all of these, we'll be talking about using these yeast strains in a particular grape or combination of grape juice to make wines, right? Some of these different aspects that we read about that talks about the characteristics of these yeast strains, some of those will still carry over into our meads. Some of them will carry over quite strongly with a very good presentation of those particular fractions, and some of them may not show so strong because they're lacking the grape juice, unless, of course, you're making a piment or a fruit and spice or something of that nature. But what I'm trying to show you here, and we picked the BA11 just as our first example, and we'll do a couple more here in a minute, that each one of these different yeast strains bring to the table its own characteristics that we can then expect to see when we make our mead. So, we just talked about different honey types being floral, fruity, spicy, and savory. If we now look at this BA11, we've seen here that it's good for aromatics. It gives you fresh tropical fruit. So there we go with the tropical or the fruity. It gives us cream, vanilla, and then now another word that we have that connects to our honey categories, spicy. All right. Stop. We're now starting our next paragraph, if you will. So this is what I did, and this is what I want to encourage you guys all to do. Go buy some colored pencils. So you've got 8 or 10 or whatever different colors. And then I want you to actually, up on the top of the Bible up here, my first page has all kinds of scribble colors and signs on here. And you can pick whatever color that you want. But we're going to do a color coding thing. And so let's just go back over to fresh fruits, fresh aromas of, and here's the thing, quote, tropical fruit. I used a yellow pencil because I think of tropical fruit as yellow, like pineapples, mangoes, papayas, that kind of thing. So up on top, in yellow, I took my little yellow colored pencil and I drew a little square, 1/2 inch wide, in that same color of yellow, and then with the pen, I wrote inside that yellow box, citrus. Okay? Now, I start over here at the top of page 12 because that's the beginning of the definitions of every yeast strain that we can buy from these guys. I take my little yellow pencil and I go through every yeast strain in the book, and anytime I find floral or fruity or tropical, I highlight that in my yellow pencil. Okay, so now I've done that on page 12, 13, 14, 15. Let's see, I'm back at 19, 21. So I went through pages 12 through 21, and I read everything that I could read, and every time I found fresh aromas of tropical fruit, floral and fruity aromas, I marked that in yellow. All right, so guess what? Now when we pick a honey, and yes, remember we said sometimes they can be several different things. They can be fruity or floral. But let's say I'm going to use OB and I don't know what yeast strain to use. Well, I know there's floral notes in there and there's some fruity notes in there. What I now can do is I can look through all these different pages, and when I find something that's lit up in yellow, and I know that means citrus because I go to the top of my page and I've got a yellow box with citrus and pin written through the top. Now when I'm trying to find yeast strains that are going to support citrus, I can just look through these pages and look for the yellow marks. So now, just in doing that one thing alone, we have all the yellow marks in all these different descriptions that I can instantly, without even having to look more than just looking for yellow markings on my papers, I can pick the yeast strains that will give me fruity or floral. Right? So now I do the same thing, but now I use like a rose-colored, a reddish-colored pencil. I do my little square up on the top, and inside that rose-colored square, I wrote spicy. So now I start at the top of page 12. I read every description, and when I come to where it says spicy, clove, nutmeg, spice, licorice, sweet spice, spice characters, and see what I'm doing now is I'm just looking for this color here, and I'm reading to you what I've found. Spice and licorice, cedar, mild spiciness. Again, spices, dark chocolate, and fresh tobacco. And by doing that with now spice, I now have a color-coded thing where the key is up on the top of the page. And all I have to do is look at that color, and I can look through these pages, and right away I can locate my yeast strains that will support a spicy piece to it. We also have berry. So maybe you want to do berry and blue for blueberry or red. Who knows? You can do that yourself. But I have spicy, I have earthy, I have berry, I have citrus. So that's how then the top of my page is with different taste fractions. Okay? Now, this is one thing I really love to be able to do on top of the taste fractions is I've got another little sign. Mine is the sign of a triangle, and then next to that I have written aroma. And then I've got another color. And that's written up on the top of my page in my keys, so to speak. And I take that color for aroma, and I go back and start at top of 12, back to the end of 20, whatever it is. And every time I find a mention of aroma, I either color that color or I make the triangle as the sign up there at the name. B11, I've got a triangle and I've got a star. Triangle tells me that adds aroma, and my star tells me, let's see, what does my star mean? Where do I have that written down? Mouthfeel.
Come on, Ryan, you have to have a legend.
Right, you do have to have a legend. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And that's, my legend has got pretty big, and so it ended up being more than just the top of page 12 and 13. But so then now I have a legend for aroma, I have a legend for mouthfeel, I have a legend for complexity. So now if you realize what I'm doing, I'm using signs and colors. I'm going through every yeast strain from front to back, and every time I see a word or some words in combination that will connect with either an aroma, a complexity, a mouthfeel, a spice, a berry, a citrus fruit, earthy, I can right away, without even paying attention to what yeast this is, I can instantly go, okay, I found a honey. I've got a goldenrod, and I want to play the spicy aspect of the goldenrod. What yeast should I use? Go look at your top up here. You find spicy. It's in the reddish cinnamon thing, and now you look through down on the pages, and boom, you find all your reddish cinnamony things. So what I'm trying to show you is if you color code and use the symbols so that all of this gibberish, all the words that would take you an hour and a half to read through and you'd forget where you started, you've got them all logged on the top of your pages with colors and with symbols so that you can instantly go back. Now I've got any honey, pick whatever honey you want to use, taste it. Taste it for today, tomorrow, the next day. Taste it for 5 weeks if you've got to before you go, okay, in this honey I get butter, I get cinnamon, I get white flowers, I get lemon citrus, I get licorice, I get cloves. Pick out all the things that you can find in that honey, and you should find some clusters that would say this is more of a spicy honey than it is floral. Or maybe you want to play the floral side of that as your primary, your prima donna, and then you want to use your spicy for the supporting cast member. All right, so then that's going to help you to consider. You should have a list of 2 or 3 or even 5 or 6 different yeast strains that can be, quote, a consideration now at this point. We haven't picked the exact yeast strain we want, but at least out of all these different yeast strains, we've now been able to pull the 5 that are going to work the best. And now we can read more and more about those to specifically like to go, okay, well, I really like all of what this does, but damn it, I wish it would do this too. And then you might be able to find another yeast that does this too. I think I'm more and more, there's some types of meads that I make that I don't want a thick, heavy, big-mouthed, fat volume mead. That doesn't work well for a Moscato carbonated hydromel, does it? You wouldn't expect that would present well if it's real thick and heavy and syrupy. That you would say, I want that to be kind of light and fluffy and easy to drink and thin. But a lot of meads, I want some good volume on the mouth. What if I happen to find a yeast strain that does everything that I want, or a whole bunch of what I want, but it doesn't give me any mouthfeel? And I want to have mouthful feel in this particular mead. All right, so now this is where we take the same must, the same honey, and we make whatever batch size you're going to want to end up at the end of the day. We split that in half, and you pick one yeast strain that'll give you, let's say it'll give you the complexity, it'll give you some aroma, and it'll give you the floral and fruity citrus piece that you want. But it's going to leave you with a thin, watered down mead. Now you can find another strain in this little family of yeast strains that we picked out with stage 1, so to speak. And now you could pick one in there that's going to give you some mouthfeel. And so now you take the same honey, the same must, you divide it in half, and you make part of it with BA11, and you make the other part with D254. And I'm just pulling some numbers out now, so don't hold me to that. But what I'm saying is you can now pick and choose and go, I can get all of this aspect out of this strain, and I'm going to blend it. And when I say blend it, please, people, don't think that you can toss 2 yeast strains actively involved in the same fermentation. You can. Sometimes. All yeasts are either neutral, positive, or sensitive to a kill factor. That's a protein. I believe it's a protein. Some of the yeasts can police their must, so to speak, their living environment by creating a protein, or it might be an acid, but they secrete something that keeps all the sissies at bay. In other words, that's a defense mechanism that they build so that other yeast jump in there and they die because they're sensitive to the kill factor. So a lot of times you can't blend different yeast strains because you're going to be starting a civil war in your batch, and you don't want to do that. Even if you had 2 yeasts that can cohabitate, yeah, at the same time, that still might not be your best bet, because you might have yeast A might do this and that and the other thing. Yeast A would do 1, 2, and 3. Yeast B would do 4, 5, and 6. but they only do those numbers if they're standing all alone and not competing for the building blocks. Imagine these guys, you got millions of little soldiers and they're trying to build a high rise. And some guys, all they do is go get the 2x4s and they carry them up to the room. And then another guy comes through with the saw and he cuts the 2x4s to size. And another guy comes through and nails them all together. When you take 2 yeast strains, even if they cohabitate, that doesn't necessarily mean, well, in fact, I can promise you, it will not give you the same combination if you made those 2 yeasts in their own separate batches and then blended them back together at the end of the day.
Quick aside, if I may.
Yes.
Slightly earlier when you were doing your color coding in the book, Carvin pointed out that apparently Scott Labs put a, if you're looking for yeast with certain profiles, you can go and to the yeast page and search on the characteristic you want. So for those who aren't book oriented like I am, like you are, and would prefer to do it digitally, you can do it on the Scott site. But still, this way you've got a record. I mean, I like the being able to do that because that means I can go to that page in the book and mark that one, you know. But
right,
you know,
right.
But if you're just on the fly going, I just want to see all the yeast that give me big fruit, you know, then you know, on an on-the-fly basis, I think that would be really good. But I'm more like you. I'd like to have the book where I could go pull it out and get sticky fingers all over it, and you know. Anyway, sidebar done. I just wanted to get that in there.
Did not, yeah, thank you, Carvin. I did not know that, and that's awesome.
You said it's brand
new. You can bet
new.
I'll be doing that a lot now. Right? Okay.
Yeah, apparently just a couple months old, so a lot of people might not know about it. So good on Carvin.
I see.
Carvin knows all.
Yeah, thank you, Carvin. Carvin's the man for sure.
Yeah, he's the man.
I drive around with this, and not as much as I used to, but I used to take this with me to work. I work for myself, and oftentimes, you know, during lunch, or if I'm just going to take a break for a few minutes, or if I wanted to refresh something, or I'm thinking about a new mead that I want to make or build, I carry this around until it's all worn out, and the ears are, you know, you can truly tell that there was a lot of love invested in dragging this dumb book around. But I'll tell you what, over a period of time, as you familiarize yourself with this, I still love to learn new strains, and I still all the time do A/B side-by-sides with strains I haven't used before in a particular honey, just because I can, because I want to learn what does 254 taste with the mesquite. And so I might have a honey where I've made some great batches using different, I've done this strain and that and the that. But if this little system that I just taught everybody tells me that I could use these 2 others, well, damn it, I'm going to make those 2 and see how they taste. And so without making this hard, I've tried to use this so that hopefully this is so simple, any dummy can make this work. I think if you wanted to take it another step further and really start to become a master at this, I would strongly suggest, let's say you just bought 10 gallons of a particular honey and you really want to know how to make that honey the best it can be. I would say if you found 4 honey or yeast strains out of this book system that I just taught you, go make 4 1 single gallons. And treat each yeast right. If they need a different temperature zone, make that happen. Some of them are going to be pigs and they want to eat more yen, and some of them are skinny minis. You know, they're Victoria's Angels models and stuff. They don't need to keep them happy. Feed them what they want. Give them the living environment that they want so that they can make the best feed that they can make, and then compare them. Now, So now let's say, okay, I've done this, and all of the guys that are good, they do the homework like this. They do the hard things that you go, shit, I don't want to make 5 side-by-side batches of 1 honey. You know what? You might, you're not going to grow. I have to be careful how I say this because I don't want to be demeaning and put anybody down. But you will learn so much more by doing these hard things. That how would you like to know every time that you're going to make something with mesquite that I already know that this yeast and this yeast make the two best traditionals with that honey that you can make. If you already know that and I tried Aspenhausen and I tried 58W3, but I found that DV10 made a lot better and the other ones kind of sucked. You just eliminated some sucks and you've just learned some things you can count on all the time. Now, if I know that I can make a really good traditional with this honey and this yeast strain, but I want to now add some fruit. Well, guess what? You're now adding fruit to the best combination of yeast and honey that you can put together. And so by learning these yeast pairings of your yeast strain and your honey, that alone will get you miles ahead of just guessing or sticking with 71B until you die. Hopefully you guys will understand and appreciate and learn the fun that this is. You'll gain a massive amount of knowledge. And so I know our brother Carvin, he knows 15 or 20 yeasts that he doesn't even need to look in the book because he knows what those yeasts are going to do for him. And we talk a lot and we think a lot alike. We were saying just the last time I talked to him earlier today about, I've been thinking about using this yeast and combining it with another strain and then blending those together after I stabilize. And we were both typing the same stuff at the same time. And when we hit send, it was like, damn, we were both saying the exact same thing right there. And that's not nothing to say other than you guys can get to a place too where you're very familiar with your friends here. This is like a painter that I know how to make ochre red because it's, 2 parts of this color. I don't know what ochre red is, but it's, red and yellow and white or whatever. If we learn these different yeast strains, and you don't have to learn them all. I mean, maybe someday I'll get to have used them all, and I don't think I have a good enough memory to be able to remember them all. But I understand 15 of these yeasts where I don't need the book anymore to look them up. I've got another 10 that I'm pretty familiar with, and I might need to look them up again. But it's so much more fun when we have all of these different parts and pieces to make. And once you begin to understand that and kind of master that thing, in my opinion, that's really where we start to have tremendous amounts of fun building and making a mead. We're making a creation by design from the very beginning before we've even sanitized our equipment. And to me, that's where the real fun is. That's where you can really learn how to express and build what you like and make it the way you like it. So that didn't take a whole lot of time. I don't even know what time it is, but I presented what I wanted to present. I don't know if some people want to call up with, please, we're inviting you guys out there in Meadland now to become an active participant of this.
Well, we do have
Joe's got a couple of questions.
Okay, sure. Fire away.
Okay, Joe Lee wants to know, how long does it take for aroma to really shine through in traditionals, assuming fermenting at coldest recommended and with proper nutrients, and that it's strain known for that attribute?
Yeah. I think if you start, so there's a couple. This is a 3-pronged answer, or maybe, I don't know how many prongs it is, but this isn't a simple. Rarely are they just one-line sentence answer, right? If you follow the principles that we've taught around here now for quite a while, you can make mead that tastes wonderful right out of the fermenter while it's still full of yeast. You can't see through it. It's nowhere close to being clear, but it tastes good. It's without flaws. That mead, I think, for the most part, will continue to make fairly significant changes for as much as 8 months to a year before it. I think at 6 months, it's come around quite a ways to where it's really going to end up, where you're not going to expect huge changes, although I've recently found some things that I've put away that I wasn't like, I don't know if I really like this or not. And so it kind of got neglected, and just, I've probably got 25 or 30 carboys full sitting around here in my house all over the place. And so sometimes I won't visit something that I'm not totally satisfied with for quite a while, and I'll go back and be quite surprised. It's like, oh, wow, 6 months this was amazing. Usually in 6 months, you have a good indication of where it's going to end up being, and I think by a year's time, you should probably be close to being finished with making your final tweaks. If you haven't considered aromas at all and you start now picking your yeast strains to contribute to aroma, you should notice some difference right away. I think a mead kind of goes through a dumb phase for 2 to 4 months where it seems like every other time you taste it, it's different than it was last time. I think I look at it as a cosign. The cosign is the screen that you see on TV where the line goes up and down in these big, long waves. So it's called a cosign wave. A new mead has a big wave where it's very high, very low, plus or minus from the means, the medium, the line in the middle. As that begins to age, and all the parts and pieces start to come together, that wave gets smaller and smaller till at some point then it's, for purposes of our explanation, it's flatlined. I think that if you start using this right away, you're going to notice some difference. By 6 months' time, you're probably going to notice quite a lot difference, and probably by 8 months' time, that aroma piece might have come to the end of what difference it can contribute. But there's some other things that we can use. They're specialty yeasts, and we can use those for specific reasons, and some of those they're designed specifically to give us a better, it'll uphold, or it will elevate the aromas even more so. If you look in the handbook, if you've got it in person, or if not, it's that section, and we won't go into this. I don't want to pollute what we've already talked about too much today, but if you go to page 45, now we talk about natural yeast derivatives, or they're also called SYI, which is, what does SYI stand for? I made it up in my mind, and so I think I'm going to make sure that I made it up right.
A little bit of mead dyslexia going on there.
Yeah, because I thought about including this in tonight's talk, but I didn't want to confuse it too much.
I think it's
We've
SIY.
got different things. Yeah.
I don't know what it stands for, but it's listed on the page. So.
Well, specific yeast ingredients is. But if you can add optimum white. So they have two different categories, reds and whites, and some of them you want to add up in primary, and others you want to add later, many times relatively close to when you want to bottle. Some of them will add some tannic parts and pieces. Several of them will make the presentation, it will present sweeter than it actually is. In other words, it won't change your gravity reading, but it will end up tasting sweeter. It will present on the tongue sweeter. And then some of them are always also designed to create much more aroma. And so without going into all of that, unless we get more questions, and if we do, that's fine. And I'm not trying to dodge the question, but if you go to page 45, that's where you're going to have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 more questions, or 4 more pages on these specific yeast derivatives that are designed to add some tannic fraction. And it will change the perceptions. Either sweet, they'll roll off some of the edges, it'll make it more aromatic. Some of them help to maintain colors that you sometimes lose. Strawberry rarely ever ends up being very red unless you use some of these derivatives that will help with those things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got more.
So that's where you want to.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Page 45.
Okay.
No, that's fine.
Got some more questions here. Peter on chat asks, does it make sense to buy a good bottle of each type of wine to see if you like it? Does that mean I might like the mead made with that yeast?
I think it's always good to find a good wine that you like. I think it's also good to buy wines that you're not familiar with and drink them, because I find it's a great way to practice your palate. So no, it's not going to, unless you're going to make a appointment with those particular grapes, it's probably not going to be the greatest representation of what that's going to make, especially in a traditional, because you're missing the fruit fraction in there, right? And like I said, some of these different fractions that the yeast will contribute will do it without the fruit there. And sometimes they need the fruit kind of to work in concert with the fruit to enhance that particular fraction of that particular nuance. So if you wanted to make some piments, that'd be a wonderful way to go learn what kind of wine you like. But also, in totally separate from that, if you go and find some wines you like, and then you go, what do I like about this? Well, I like the acidity. I like its dryness. I like that it's tart. I like that it's thin and watery, or it's heavy. It has a long finish. In other words, you play the game with your mouth to learn what you like and why, and then that'll give you better ideas of what you want to learn to contribute in your yeast selections to make your meads match up closer to the types of wines that you like to drink.
Okay, Joe was also asking about your experience with Surly aging traditionals.
I do quite a bit of that, actually. And we have a professional meadery here in Colorado up north, a couple hours northeast of Denver, and those guys actually make wonderful meads. They're one of the rare meaderies that I know of that they set their stuff for a year before they'll even bottle it to get the surly fraction to it. You have to babysit it. It's not something you just put away and forget for the next 6 or 8 months. So I'll quickly tell you kind of what I like to go about it, and then once we're done tonight, actually, Vicki, if you'll go look for, please do a search on the internet so you can add a page to the notes. Look for an article written by B Squared. So do a search for B Squared, Surly aging, and you should come up with a very great article that if you could attach that to the show notes tonight, people can go and read very specific information about that.
Got it.
But here's what you want to know. Okay, perfect. Thank you for posting that. And so you guys who want to learn about this particular piece, this is the best information that I've been able to come upon. What you don't want to do, so I've always promoted the idea that during fermentation and even afterwards, until you're ready to rack, we want to keep our yeast in suspension. Now, the reason that we want to do that while it's in fermentation, while it's actively fermenting, you probably all know that within days of pitching, if you don't stir your must, you're going to start to have some dropout. You're going to have the yeast dropping out to the bottom. One of the bad habits that winemakers have brought to the to the mead world, is they're dead set on racking off of your lees. They don't stir their lees in suspension. They pitch, and then they rack at about 10:20, 10:30, and then many times they come back complaining, I've got a stall, I'm stuck at 10:10, and I don't know what to do. The reason that they have been taught through history to rack early is because they're afraid of off flavors that come from burying your yeast alive during fermentation. So you want to rouse your lees into suspension the entire time that you're fermenting. Doesn't have to be every day. Even every 3 or 4 days or 5 could be fine, but you want to not let them pile up on the bottom of your fermentation vessel because they're alive. But if you let them pile up, now I expect that gets warmer heat-wise. They're not getting any exposure to the yan, to the honey. In other words, you're burying them alive on top of each other, and you're not giving them the nutrients and the foods and the sugars and all the things that they want to keep happy, and so they start to stink. They're getting pissy.
They're sort of dying in a yeast stampede in very slow motion.
That's correct. And as you know, you don't want a dead dog living in your refrigerator. That's going to stink up the whole refrigerator. You don't want these dead yeast laying in the bottom of your thing before their time. And so you want to keep your yeast in suspension. I personally believe that even if you keep them in suspension well after they've stopped fermenting, either they've tapped out because they've reached their ABV tolerance level, or they've run to bone dry and you've stabilized it. And I hope we're all using chemicals to stabilize our stuff. I understand if you don't want to, but without going into that, I'd just like to encourage you to maybe consider learning more about that, and you might change your mind. But in any case, I've read that there's indication that if you leave the yeast in suspension, even after the fermentation is done, those yeast will act as small sponges, and I think there's 2 indications that the live yeast will continue to go around and they'll eat some of the chemicals, some of the leftovers from the construction site. So now that they're done building the house, they're going to get their push broom and their dustpan, and they're going to go around and start cleaning the place up. I believe that the live ones will do that, but I also believe that the dead ones that were floating around might act like a feather duster, where just their presence in there act as a sponge, and they will soak up some of the things that I think those things would probably drop out over time. But I think I've found that if I leave my lees in suspension after for 2 to 4 weeks or maybe more, keep them stirred up, then as soon as I stop stirring, they seem to drop out much faster than they would have before. And I think that's because they start to grab and lock up. They grab hands with their buddy, so to speak. And so now, or they were a molecular weight that wasn't quite heavy enough to make them fall to the bottom. When they've grabbed a hold of their friends, now they weigh more and they drop to the bottom. And I think I believe that I see my stuff drop out a lot quicker, and my meats will become a lot cleaner, faster if I keep my yeast in suspension for a while after the fermentation is over.
There is absolutely, definitely scientific support behind that, because especially if you're, like when you're fining and all of that, you definitely want to be stirring your stuff regularly for a couple of days, because what that does is the particles in your mead are very far away from each other. And the more you stir, the more chance they have to come into contact with each other and stick together. And then the more of them stick together, the faster they'll settle out. And all the people who've done experiments with stir plate fermentation have found the exact same thing. As soon as you turn the thing off, everything drops clear.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as much as it sounds totally counterintuitive to stir your mead to make it clearer, it actually does work that way. Right.
So that was all of what I just said here recently, and thank you for that piece, AJ. That's great. That was leading up to the Sir Lee piece, okay? And let me backtrack real quick on one other piece. If you guys don't plan to age on your lees, I think it's wonderful to put your bentonite up front, right before you pitch. And I found that then as soon as you stop stirring, within a couple of days, or a week, 5, 6, 7 days, you've got a pretty damn clear mead. It's not polished, it's not crystal clear, but it drops out within a week or 10 days real fast when you put your midnight up front. And I don't get the muddy, dirty flavors that I used to when I would make a yeast slurry and a midnight slurry and put it in at the end of fermentation after I stabilized. I would make the slurry, like they said, with the hot water and let it sit overnight and then put it in and stir it. I could always taste that mud flavor in my meads doing it that way, but I have never been able to taste that mud flavor putting dry bentonite in my carboy, or not carboy, but my bucket or my stainless steel fermenter up front. So if you don't want to age on the lees and you want to get a good clean mead quickly, put bentonite in up front. Do not use the bentonite if you want to age on the lees. And I can't say this indefinitely, but I don't do the bentonite when I want to age on the lees because I'm afraid that I might have too much exposure with the fine bentonite that would still be left in there, because in order to do the lees aging, you've got to have what we call fine lees in there, because those are the ones that over time will eventually die, and when they explode, all their guts, their insides, the yeast membrane will explode, and then all of the things that were on this inside suddenly have been released to change both the flavor, the aroma, and the mouthfeel from them dying off and exploding. Because that's a long period of time. Hang on just a second, AJ. I don't want bentonite in there when I'm doing that. So I don't bentonite if I'm going to age on the lees, but I will stir them, keep them in suspension until, I don't know, a month after I'm done fermenting and it's been stabilized or we tapped out. I stabilize everything, even if I tap it out or they've ran dry, I still stabilize everything. I believe it makes a much better mead for many reasons, but that's not what this show is about. But what you want to do now, if you're going to age on your lees, you don't want to age on what we call the rough lees. For those of you that have kept your stuff in suspension for a good period of time and then you stop, what you'll notice is you've got a much coarser, heavier, thicker pieces of the detritus that drop down first. Those are the big, heavy, chunky pieces. Those drop out in the first, 8 or 10, 12 hours, 24 hours. You'll continue to see, if you let that just all sit for a month, you would see stratification in the bottom of all that garbage, where you're going to have the real heavy, like gravel in the bottom, and then you're going to have marbles, and then you're going to have stuff the size of salt, so that eventually it's the finest little powder that are, like single specks of dust. So we have what we call fine lees, which are the light, fluffy lees, and then we have the coarse or rough lees. We do not want to age on the rough lees. So let's say that we've kept everything in suspension for a month after we've finished fermenting. Now we can stop. Let it sit for, 12, 24 hours. You'll have to determine that, because each biomass, some yeast doesn't seem like they make up very many. It might be done and there's only a quarter inch of lees in the bottom of a 10-gallon batch, and then you might make another batch where it's like there's 2 or 3 inches of crap on the bottom. So unfortunately, I do not know what to tell you how far to wait, but if you wait until you start to see a difference in the rough stuff versus now it's starting to pile up on the top of the rough stuff, but it's not as heavy, it's not as thick, it's lighter, that's then when you now want to rack off of the rough lees and leave them behind, but take all of your dirty must with all of the fine lees with you into a new container. And now you can leave those leaves in your mead for as long as you want to, per se. And the longer you leave them in there, the more changes will come. CY 3079 is much, much faster to die and explode as all the other strains, at least of the ones that I'm familiar with and the ones that I age on. I think CY might start to lyse about 4 to 6 months, and the other ones take 9 to 12 months. You don't even necessarily have to leave them in there until they explode, but what you'll find is your tactile, what you feel, like with your fingers, only what you feel in your mouth and with your tongue, and your mead will get very creamy. You'll start to smell fresh bread crusts, sometimes puddings like rice pudding or creme brulee. You'll start to get some of these creamy things, butter. And you know, you guys that drink champagne, there's a lot of that bread crust piece in there, and so it continues to get a nice, lush, smooth, creamy texture on your tongue, and eventually, at some point, it will change your flavor profiles as well. And so, with that, you just want to keep it suspended. And then at some point, when you think you've got to where you want it to be, then stop suspending your leaves so that they can eventually drop out. And then you can rack off of them and be done. Now, here's just a quick piece for anything you do. I think, so I'm going to use a different example to make it cut and dry different. A clean example of something totally different. When you're doing an acid adjustment, let's say you have a mead that's a little bit flat, it lacks a little bit of sparkle, and you want to kind of brighten it up a little bit, make it come to life. So you put out your little shot glasses, 3 or 4 across the table, each with 1 ounce of mead in your stuff, and you put 2 drops of tartaric acid in your first shot glass. You put 3 in the second, 4 in the third, and so on and so forth. Don't just stop when you go, okay, don't make each shot glass, and when you get to 3 and you go, okay, 3's good, I really like this. Don't stop right there. What I want you to do, and I want you to do this with your lees aging too, I want you to do this with all of your adjustments, with all of your additional adjuncts that you add. Somehow do it so that you can learn what going too far tastes like. If doing acid adjustments, all you ever did is you got it to where you like it, well, first off, how do you know that if you stopped at three drops, you go, I really like this? Well, do you know or not know that 4 drops is even better? Maybe 4 drops is too much. But if every time you do this, you've gone to where you've gone too far, you are now teaching your tongue what too much tastes like. And so you're giving yourself a very defined barrier on the too far side of things. All right, let's go back to the lees aging. Let's say I really like this. It's creamy. It's lush. I've got tapioca pudding in there, and we all have different ways we talk about flavors. But let's say you go, I really like this. I want to stop right here. I don't want to go any farther. Please take a small, even if it's a quart. I don't know what size batches you make, but take some and let it age on the lees until, without a doubt, we went too far.
I would suggest for that one just the last gallon in your batch or whatever. Just take that and put it in a jug and keep stirring that. That's right.
But my point is, if you never go to where you're absolutely too far, you never know what too far tastes like. A judge that can sit here and go, this has got too many nutrients in it. You know why they can taste that?
Because they've done it.
They've taken nutrients to the too far point so that they know that that's what too many nutrients taste like. If you're drinking something's wrong with this. I don't know what it is, but if something's not right, if you've put too much malic acid in something to where you know what too much malic acid tastes like, you could taste that, and you can tell the guy that just says, I don't know what the hell's going on here. You could go, oh, I recognize that. That's too much malic.
Well, I'm a big proponent of making mistakes. You learn way more about doing it wrong than by doing it right every time.
Absolutely. You know,
make mistakes. Make big, glorious mistakes.
Well, and everything you're learning, take it to the part where you know that you've absolutely gone too far. And now you're establishing a boundary on both sides of the not enough all the way to too far. And you will know much more than if you only know that infinite spot in the middle where you don't have a final resting place on the other end.
Can I rewind you for a second about putting bentonite in something that you're planning to do surly on?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Based on my limited knowledge from what I learned in school about how flocculants work, I'm suspecting that if you did decide after the fact to do surly on a batch that you did put bentonite in up front, what it's mainly going to do is shorten up the amount of time that you want to wait before you rack it off your gross lees. And it's also going to shorten the amount of time that you need to, it's going to shorten the amount of time between stirrings. So if, you might be able to get away with every 3 days, every 5 days otherwise, but you may have to do it every day if you put bentonite in it. You'll know by how it settles. If you're getting a thick layer of settling every time, then you know you need to stir it more often.
Sure.
If you decide after the fact that you wanted to do a surly experiment on a batch, or half a batch after you've already racked it, so that you can tell the difference between surly and not surly.
Yeah. Incidentally, they have a new product called Surly that you can buy in the Lavin catalog or in the Scott's catalog, that you can add that post fermentation, and I think I've bought some, but to be honest, I haven't used it yet. It's on deck for one of my next new experiments. But I believe in 4 to 5 weeks you can taste what would normally take 9 months or more doing the old-fashioned way that we've just talked about. They have a specific product called Surly that you can add and see the results, the full-blown results in a short order. So you might want to play with that as well. Incidentally, in the B Squared article that Vicky's posted on the web pages, that will give you an actual stirring schedule based on, when it gets to this many months old, you stir this many times a week or a month until it gets to this old, and then you continue to stir it less and less as time goes by. And if you're one of those guys that have to have the recipe, it'll be in there. I kind of wing it and just keep my stuff, stirred up so that every time I see that it starts to stratify, where you see different layers of clarification up top, and that's time to stir it around again.
Okay, we got a couple more questions here. Mike Matson wants to know if you can touch on cold crashing and stabilizing, specifically on the proper sequence and temperature control for each.
That's a great question, Mike. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for asking. So you've actually caught me what I do, I wouldn't teach you to do, because I haven't. I do some things that I wouldn't teach somebody to do unless they totally understand how to do it by the book first, and or even specifically more. So some of us have some analyzers where we can actually measure how much free SO2 is in solution. Without that machine, and they're kind of costly. I think the cheap ones are about $700 now, and they go up to twice that. what you should do, and I'm going to be a little bit fuzzy here because I don't do it this way, so I don't know the exact specifics, but I would tell you to cold crash it first until you get a good bit of your lees dropped out. In other words, certainly some meads respond differently than others. And then, of course, your size of batch and the temperature that you cold crash in will make a difference. But let's just say that your hunch tells you that most of the stuff that's going to drop out in a relatively short period of time, maybe that's a week, or maybe that's 2 weeks, maybe that's 3 weeks. We all run on a different time schedule, don't we? I mean, one thing you're
and
going to
yeast
learn,
don't have wristwatches.
That's right, and at least making mead
That
will
we
teach
know
you to be more. It will teach you to be patient, or at least it will teach you how impatient you are. One of the two. But you should cold crash until you're done cold crashing, and I'm going to let you decide when that is. And then you're going to want to put your metabisulfite, the units that you use when you don't have a machine is a 1/4 teaspoon for a 5 or 6 gallon batch. And so you want to take a 1/4 teaspoon of metabisulfite, put it in anytime I add any kind of powder to anything mead related, I put it in with a little bit of warm water and I dilute it so it's a liquid. Just because I've gotten used to not making volcanoes, and I know we're not really talking about. We're not
Who
talking
hasn't
about
done
volcano
this?
here, but yeah, I know, right? The metabisulfite might not necessarily dissolve in your must. I don't use Camden tablets for that reason. They suck it. You got to break them up, and they don't dissolve very well. So I just
Actually, I found you go to the drugstore and get for $10 pill crusher. It works really, really well.
Okay, there you go. I even have a pill crusher, and I never liked the Camden tablets because they're not all metabisulfite either. I think they're only like 62% metabisulfite, and the others is filler. Anyway, put your metabisulfite in the bottom of your aging vessel that you're going to now rack out your mead that has been cold crashed. Transfer the stuff minus the lees into your new vessel with a 1/4 teaspoon of metabisulfite. That should suffice for 5 or 6 gallons. And so adjust accordingly based on the volume of your batch. And then you want to add, and you're going to have to look this up because I don't have that on the top of my head, but I think it's half a tablespoon of sorbate per gallon.
There's a
half a teaspoon. I have it in front of me. 2.5 milliliters per 4.5 liters. So about a half a teaspoon per gallon.
Right. That's what. Perfect. Thank you. Some of those things I'm older now and I don't remember as well as I once did. I'm a victim of the 70s. So that's what you want to do there. Now, lastly, if you go to More Wine, they have an articles section on their website. A wonderful guy, a friend of mine, Shay Comfort, has written most of the articles for them. And if you go to there's 2 articles in there on SO2 editions, and I believe the one you're looking for is called Managing Your SO2. So this is morewine.com, articles section. And there's only 2 about SO2 editions. One of them just talks about what it is and what it does. The other one, for those of you that don't have the expensive machine, this is the best thing by far that I've learned, where it will tell you based on your pH levels and your volume of how much SO2 you want to add at different periods in time along the way. In other words, for SO2 to work the way it's supposed to, you have to have free SO2, and that means it's available SO2. When you put it in a must, it will go around and it will make friends and it'll grab hold of the bad guys that you don't want in there. So what you initially add into your batch, it's not going to all be free and available to go to work because some of it already went to work. And so those are cops that now have a bad guy handcuffed to them. Once a cop has a bad guy handcuffed to him, he can't work anymore. So he's not free for the next call to go, oh, we got some oxygen coming in on level 7. If you already got a bad guy hooked up to you, you're stuck and you can't go to work.
I'm thinking clean up on aisle 5 here, you know. It's
That's right. That's right. So it's the free SO2 that's available. It's free to go to work because it hasn't bound itself to the things that it's designed to combat. So we're really talking about free SO2 to be available to go to work. Your first edition that you make, I believe probably, no, I do something different, so I'm thinking way back. I think about 40% of the first edition gets bound within the first 24 hours. And Carvin, if you're still on, I know you know these numbers, and if you could chime in, that'd be wonderful.
I think Vicky's linked the article.
Okay. This is not what you guys want to do, but this is what I do. I'm gonna let my hair down a little bit, and I'll tell you what I do. I know that a good part of your first edition will be bound. I also have a machine that I can measure it, so I'm not too worried about messing up here. I actually add my SO2 before I've cold crashed. So I add my SO2 up front when all of the bad guys, all the junk, my total amount of leads are still in there. I add double of what so I would add a half. Actually measure it with weight, but in equivalency, I would add 2 times, or that would be a half a teaspoon into a 5 or 6 gallon batch. Because I know that with all my garbage in there, all of my leaves and all of my fruit solids or whatever, I'm going to lose almost half of that, become bound. They become handcuffed to the bad guys as soon as I add it in. I'll add that in and then cold crash, and I get the same result, and yet I haven't lost twice my amount of racking losses.
Okay, the advantage of doing it that way would be that because you're binding it to all the yeast and the yeast is conking out early, the cold crashing should be a lot faster because it's no longer active and you're not having to wait for the whole must to cool down for the yeast to stop being active. The reason cold crashing works is because it slows the particles from their wiggling around, and when they stop wiggling around, they tend to drift to the bottom. So that's why cold crashing works, and that's why when you cold crash and you're going to rack onto your metabisulfite, you want to do it while it's still cold before it warms up again and the yeast start working again.
But so just for a small correction in what you said, and what you said is all true, except that yeast themselves don't have any way to flagellate. They don't have a propulsion system. They only float.
Yeah, but what they've found is that they're still, when they're active, they're still more likely to stay in suspension, and when you chill them down, they fall out of suspension.
That works, and there's another. So just as an adjunct, there's another reason why that works, and that's because the density of your rust has gotten greater because the molecules are closer together in a colder suspension, and so we're kind of crowding them out as well by having them live in a higher atmosphere.
Honestly, I think that my brain says that wants to work the opposite way, but typically when you're cold crashing, you want it to be around where water is at its most dense, which is at about 4 degrees Celsius. I'm sorry, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. 32, okay.
And because it has alcohol in it, you can actually cold crash it.
It can go lower than that.
Yeah, right.
But technically, the water molecules are going to be at their most the water molecules are going to, they're going to be at their most compact at about 4 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it won't freeze if you go below freezing, it's not going to freeze because of the alcohol content. But I think you're still best at around 4 degrees at that point.
Yeah.
Because that's where water is being weird.
Let me go back real quick to then this the More Wine article on SO2 management. the first addition we make of SO2 becomes bound, and so some of those cops now have bad guys handcuffed to them. So you've lost some of your free SO2. SO2 works based on your pH level. And so the only place I've ever found where it will tell you, without you having a machine, how to manage your SO2, and of course it's on a guess system, but it's based on a guess system that was guessed upon from long-standing keeping records with a machine. In that article, it will tell you how much to add based on your pH, and every time you rack from one vessel to another, or you get in and you draw some out to taste and do some tweaking as far as, well, this would like a little bit of thus or so. Basically, anytime you open the top and move stuff around, more cops get handcuffed up with the bad guys, and so you continue to lose cops all the time. This article will teach you how to keep adding more cops in there so that you've got a good population of cops versus bad guys to continue to do what they're supposed to do. Next question.
Poker Face Pablo on chat was asking about Turlospora and how well it works with QA23. He's using it to add complexity to his traditionals.
Yeah. Let me know when you find out, bud. You're you're dancing to a song that I don't even know.
Okay, because he was asking if there were any other yeasts that he thought would work well with that.
Yeah, Turlospora delbrueckii.
Breckii, I think it's called.
Yeah, Breckii, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what he's trying to accomplish with that particular bug, so I wouldn't know what other things might be a comparable substance to use. If you're still there, Paul,
Pablo.
Tell us what it is you're accomplishing with that. Is that to add a funk note to it, some barnyard fizz, so to speak?
Well, he's saying he wanted to add some complexity. He didn't go any further with
Yeah.
I don't know.
Go back and go get used to the page. What was it, 45? Yeah. Go look at the stuff at 45, 6, and 7 in the book.
Oh, okay. He has more here.
Yeah.
Okay. In the chat, Kervin's saying he uses it with RC212.
I don't see
Okay.
that part. Yeah, and
So that's another one.
Pablo says it's harvested from apple skins. It's a wild yeast.
Yeah, it's a non-Saccharomyces yeast.
Right.
Under the name of Biodiva is what Kervin's been using.
Okay, yeah. So I generally will look for a yeast that will add complexity. If we go all the way back up to where we first started this with step one, finding what category your honey fits into, and then you're looking for the different strains that kind of match up with that. There's several different strains, and I actually have, and you'll be surprised. I think that's my star, meaning I have in my keys, that's a star symbol. There's about probably 8 of them or so that add complexity, and so I generally get my complexity either from the yeast and the natural attributes of the honey, or oftentimes then I'll even add, let's say you've got some cloves and some cinnamon and some allspice fractions in your must, but you want to bump those up a little bit, well then just add a little bit of allspice, cinnamon, and cloves in your must in a little bag or whatever, so that you can pull it out when you get to that place that you want it to be at.
Personally, what I like doing to add a little bit of complexity to my traditionals is by adding a little bit more of different honeys. My usual is I put a kilogram of buckwheat in with my 5-gallon batch of traditional using either goldenrod or clover honey.
Right.
And
I do the
I find
same
it,
thing.
yeah. So if you're
Yeah.
looking for complexity, adding different honeys is another way.
I agree.
Yeah.
I know carbon. A lot of people do that.
Okay, we've got another one from Jeff Katra.
Hi, Jeff.
He's hanging out with us tonight. He actually got a chance to be off work for a change, I think. Anyway, he says that he's seeing like two schools of thought with mead making. First is to ferment to dry, stabilize, and then back sweeten. And then second, it's his preferred method, which is to start high and let it ride. Have you found that certain yeasts hold up better to high osmotic pressures during the initial rehydration and pitch phase?
All right. Great question. Osmotic stress starts at 1117. What does that mean that it starts? I don't know, but that's what I've read in some manuals that yeast are fine and suffered no stress until 1117. And keep in mind, every strain, maybe it's 1117 and a half or 9, but that's just a general number that you want to keep in mind. I have personally not had problems up to 1160. I think 1160 is probably my highest starting gravity. If I'm making something that I want a higher gravity even than that, I'll pitch at 1160, and then I'll add more honey in after my yeast have had a chance to chew that sugars up for a couple days, so that I'm not just making such a high gravity that it's unbearable, where there's so much pressure on the cell membrane that nothing can transfer in or out of the cell because of the osmotic stress. In a high gravity thing, for sure one thing you can do to help fortify and make stronger to buff up your yeast is do pure O2 additions at pitch, 12 and 24 hours, even another one at the third sugar break if you want to. The good information about that is in Jamal White's book from White Laboratories called Beer, Yeast, and Fermentation Principles or something like that. If you just look Scott White up in beer fermentation, you'll get it. He's got an entire chapter devoted to that. By doing that, you're giving sterols to the yeast. I'm not sure how many people realize that yeast actually tap out. Their alcohol tolerance overcomes them. Their cell membrane becomes permeable at a certain alcohol level, and some of them, their membrane becomes permeable at 14%, while others will stay. They don't become permeable until 18 or 19%. Now that many of us have started to add pure O2 additions, in the early stages, we've given them some extra material that they now have been able to build some superatomic armor, and so they can now live in even higher alcohol ABVs before their cell wall becomes permeable. Once their cell wall becomes permeable, the alcohol can get inside and it robs a couple pieces. And I don't know specifically what those are, but let's just say that once you're swimming in a swimming pool, it's 20% alcohol. A demon can climb inside your skin and rip out your heart, and now you're dead. So all these different yeasts, the demon gets in and stills their heart at a certain level, but by adding O2 up front early on, they now have a stronger, more buffed out defense system. So they go many times. I would say it's safe to say that if you use O2 and then do all the other things that we talk about, rehydrating with Go Firm, controlling your temperatures, feeding them a staggered nutrient addition, that it's not uncommon for every yeast strain out there to be able to go 2 or 3 points higher in their ABV. Now, back to answering your question more specifically, I'm mostly of the school of picking an ABV that you want and then running it dry. You have total control over that. Once there's no more food left for the yeast, they are much more easily put to bed with your sulfite additions and your cold crashing than if there's still a lot of food that they're desperately trying to stay alive to consume the rest of the sugar. And that, of course, then is also why we stopped feeding them early on, one of the reasons why, so that they still don't have a lot of good nutrients and food way late in the process of the finishing end of your fermentation. The reason I like to do that is I can control my ABV. I can stabilize much more efficiently and effectively. You cannot count on exactly where your yeast are going to tap out, and so you're playing a guessing game. You're shooting at a moving target in the dark, so to speak. And I find that for most of the
Brian, you're cutting in and out.
I'm sorry. I think most strains of yeast will make too high of an alcohol to be able to make a good mead with if you are of the mind that you want to make them tap out with residual sugar left over at the end of the day. I think 12 to 14% is a great ABV for most meads. When you start getting higher than that, it takes longer for them to age so that the alcohol smooths out. But then they're also usually that's too much. A lot of people don't like to drink that much because they like to drink and they can only drink a couple of an 18, where they can drink 4 or 5, or they can drink more of a 12 than an 18. A lot of people don't like that alcohol heat, even though it might not be bad heat from fusels or whatnot. They just don't like that heat. It takes longer to smooth out. And I've had a standing bet for the last 4 years that I could give you 2 meads, one that was back sweetened at 1020 and one that left with residual sugars at 1020, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And I'm still convinced of that, except a friend of mine, Steve Paddock, taught me something that Ken Schramm taught him, and that was you can't taste the difference, but if you know to do this, you can feel the difference. And that is a mead that was left with residual honey will make your lips stick together more when you're kissing yourself like that with the mead on your lips.
I gotta see people
How
doing
interesting.
this at the MeadCon Mazur Cup. It's gonna be like people going
Yep,
around
it's a
going,
new judging technique.
So, and I have not done this. I rarely do I make anything with residual sugar unless I pour brandy into my port style meads at a certain place, because I want to have a lot of honey. I want to have a lot of fruit in there. And so I'll make an 18% mead. I'll pick usually K1V or DV10. I'll put more sugar in there than I want to have it. So I'll start it at a higher gravity than that. And then I'll arrest my fermentation by forcing my yeast to tap out by adding my brandy. So the only time I've ever been able to taste something with leftover sugar isn't a fair assessment, really, because it's quite different because I've got a boatload of brandy in there. And so I don't know this feeling that you get personally firsthand of smacking your lips together with a mead with residual sugar left behind versus one that was back sweetened. But I personally don't believe you. After it's had enough time to age and to assimilate together, I don't think you can taste the difference at all.
Okay.
Be an interesting experiment, though.
It would.
One thing I wanted
Yeah.
to add about high gravity starts is do yourself a favor and make an acclimated starter so that you're not stressing your yeast out by just dunking them immediately into something that's high gravity.
That's right.
So you
You should
rehydrate.
never jump your yeast in there. Slowly build
Yeah.
Even if you're not going to let a starter sit overnight, don't just pour your yeast into the swimming pool from the hot shore, sitting on the, your blanket on the chair, and then dive in.
It's just shoving them off the diving board.
Yeah, that's cruel, and that's how a lot of people mess their fermentation up from the very start. But not only do we want to temperate temperature-wise, but we want to temperate with your gravity, with your pH level, and all the other things. You want to slowly bring your yeast. I like to use the example of, how a chick's going to get in a swimming pool. The first thing she does is sit over by the ladder, and she puts her feet in up to, her calves, splashes around a little bit, and then she'll get in a little bit deeper, and she'll stand on the stairs, and eventually she'll put her butt on the. So like you're slowly sneaking in,
slowly getting the butt of the bathing suit wet.
Dive off the edge, man. To hell with it.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually a gender thing, because I know women who dive off and men who carefully get in.
Of course,
yeah.
I know that was yeah. But so you see the no diving signs all the time. We should put a no diving sign in our fermentation vessels because it's not good.
I love it. That's great. Okay, I'm going to pull you back on track here because we've got more questions coming in. And
okay, sure.
As usual, Mister, I think our shows should be shorter. Yours the longest show. So, all right. So Daniel Gate asks, would a pectin enzyme aid a traditional mead in any way at all, or is that purely just for melamels, etc.?
All right, so I'm going to give you my pet peeve about pectic enzymes. I do believe they do exactly what they say they're supposed to when you use them up front before you ferment. I'm of the mind that when you add them after your fermentation is over as a fining agent, I'm not convinced that you continue to break down, your enzymes continue to break down the pectin unless you put a boatload in there. I think the reason why adding your pectic enzyme at the end for a fining agent is the old-fashioned, you've got a positive and a negative charged ion in there. And hope maybe Tom's going to listen to this someday, or somebody else that knows more science than I do. But I don't think it's an enzymatic thing at that point. I think it's the old-fashioned, we're going to add a positive to a negative until the molecular weight of these guys weigh enough to make them sink.
Yeah, typically if you're fining and you add you add like bentonite, which is one, and that doesn't work, and then you add sparkaloid, which is the other, and that doesn't work, then try pectinase just in case. But yeah, I don't think it's really going to have any effect unless there's something with pectin in it, and yeast doesn't have pectin in it. So really, I don't think there's any point in putting it into a traditional unless you're adding fruit. And there's, if you look it up, there's, I think, a Dutch guy who did a bunch of different experiments using applesauce, and he showed that it liquefies the applesauce if you don't have a lot of sulfites in it, if you don't have a lot of alcohol in it. But if you've got a lot of alcohol or a lot of sulfites, it does definitely inhibit the ability to work. And I myself have found in cases, usually Joe's Ancient Orange variants, where I've had to use pectinase after the fact, I need to add double in order to get it to do what I wanted it to do. Normally it's like, I think, a half a teaspoon per gallon if you add it up front, and I need a full teaspoon per gallon if I'm trying to get it to clear after the fact.
Mm-hmm. So,
okay.
I hope to someday find out a solid answer, but I think you've just even confirmed even more of what I've been feeling with your example of the Dutch guy.
I'll try to find that link because he has English translations for everything. I'll try to find that link later when my computer wants to play more than one window.
There's a whole bunch of other things. There's chitosan and chiasol. There's Albumex. There's a bunch of different fining agents that you can use.
Peter says biofine.
Yeah, and a lot of them work on the positive. A lot of them work on the positive, negative, and a lot of them work as a chemical reaction to make stuff stick to it. So it really, you may, I've got one really pesky banana wine that doesn't want to clear for love nor money, and I don't even know what I'm going to do with it anymore. I may just run it through a friggin' coffee filter. But yeah,
I've always wondered if you could take that and freeze it and freeze distill it or cryo distill it.
Actually, yeah,
And,
that'd probably do the trick too. I just haven't had the
Yeah.
nerve to put a glass carboy out on my balcony at -30.
Right. No.
Okay,
All right. What's
so
the next question?
Joe Lee is asking, does osmotic stress cause off flavors, or does it just make the fermentation less efficient or slower?
Well, for sure, at some point it could arrest fermentation entirely. I know I have not heard of it causing off flavors, but generally when you get to the places where you're starting to be concerned about osmotic stress, that's when you want to be pitching 3 or 4 grams per gallon, maybe even 5 grams per gallon. And so we compensate by boosting our pitch rates, because we know that it's much harder on the yeast and they have a lot longer road to hoe to get to the other end. And so generally I like to use, I teach people to use 2 grams per gallon up to 1120, and then move to 3 grams up to 1150, and then move to 5 grams a gallon above that.
Anecdotally, I have never noticed an off flavor from that, but I've definitely noticed inhibited fermentation kinetics.
Sure. And so I think if you were talking about, am I going to get off flavors? Probably not initially, but if you've wounded your biomass enough and worn them out so bad that, see, part of what happens with off flavors is as your yeast reproduce, each new generation can only reproduce a less amount of times than its mom. And so I've gotten an argument once with an idiot that thought you could take a 5-gram batch of yeast, and because they reproduced, you could make a 50-gallon batch of wine with it, no problem.
Maybe eventually, but it's not going to be a happy biomass.
No way. They're going to be deformed, and they're not even going to be making the same stuff that they made 400 generations ago.
Right.
It'll still probably make alcohol, but it's not going to be happy about it.
Yeah, you really want to compensate by making a larger biomass pitch to begin with. If you were to see off flavors, I'm suspecting that you wouldn't see it up front, but you'd see a struggle at the end, and oftentimes that struggle will either lead to a stall or sometimes off flavors.
Okay, I think we've got one last question from Pablo. What's your favorite port yeast?
K1B.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah. I think that's probably my favorite. CV10. Those would be my 2 favorites.
All right.
R2 might be. I have not used R2, but that would be. That is the next one on my list to play with is R2, and RC212 as well. But I think R2 would be a much. That's actually a yeast that was designed for Sauterne, ice wine style of wine, and so I think that would work real well for a port style as well.
That's a good thought. I actually think I tried RC212 the last time I tried making feed it till it taps out batch, and I haven't actually gone back to taste it yet, so I should really go to the Mead corner and find out how that worked out. Usually I use EC1118.
Yeah. I think that works okay if you can control the temperatures to keep it running sub happy.
For some reason EC1118 does not go blasting through everything I feed it. It does eventually, but it does it slow. Like I had that, I started a batch with that and 7.1B at the same time, and the 7.1B was like way, way faster done, even though they were started somewhere similar in starting gravity.
Joe Lee just interjected, have you played with ale yeasts yet? He notices that the popularity is increasing in California and some of the other places.
Yeah, actually, I have not, because I'm not the ones I have played with. I'm not much of a fan of, to be honest with you. I find that because I don't have a lot of experience, I'm really probably not one to have much comment other than that. But I've generally found that one of the things that they leave me wanting more of is mouth volume. And so because of that alone, I haven't really been a fan of ale yeast enough to play with the idea well enough to really become versed in it.
Gosh, I'm thinking that we need to get you back next week or something. We're already 15 minutes over 2 hours.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I think if it goes long and it's interesting and it's flowing, that's okay.
Yeah,
but
totally,
we should probably.
Yeah, no question about it. But I also think they'll keep you on all night if we give them half a chance. So.
Well, I don't care.
Well, we could bring you back next week. Hint, hint, hint.
Well, if you need somebody to fill in a spot next week, I'm good for that.
It's actually open because all the people that I've been slotting into spots, nobody picked next week.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I'll take that spot.
Okay.
All right, so everybody get your questions ready.
Yeah, really. Get your questions ready and message them to me or email them to me or get them to AJ, something, so that we've got them. But what do you want to talk about next week, Ryan?
Well, I think maybe, at least in part, we should talk about these the SIYs or SYIs, whatever they are. The other, and I haven't used all of them. I've probably used 2/3 of them, but we can talk about the yeast-specific additions that can work for the aromatics and the complexity and the color retention. And those types of things. We can look over those, and
okay, cool.
I'll toss some things in my mind a little bit and bring some other similar parts to the table.
Good deal. Thank you. That'll be really good. So y'all got your homework. You got the Scott Labs book, and Daniel's saying you're gonna get mobbed. So all y'all
Trust
know.
me, Daniel, we're always looking for more interaction with you guys out there in the audience.
Totally.
I would love to teach in classes where there's people in warm chairs with faces and hands in the air. That's a lot easier for me than talking into a phone.
Yeah.
I'm getting better at it, I think. The phone part, I mean, I love to stand up in front of an audience and speak. I could do that for a living if I was allowed to somehow.
It's really different when it's a subject you actually love as opposed to a subject someone's making you talk about.
There's this thing, it's called the Con. It's coming up in March, and people stand in front of other people and talk and stuff,
Yeah, I know. I wanted to last year, and I just let the time slip by and didn't get my spot before it was filled up.
Well, so spots are open now, so.
I know.
Yeah.
And we've already got. Steve and I are going to do something together with some yeast test. We want to bring a bunch of meads that have been made the same with different yeast strains, right along what we talked about tonight. But for you guys that are going to come, we want to have you come and taste 10 or 15 different meads that were all made exactly the same with the same must, and the only difference was the yeast strain. So you can taste for yourself what our C212 tastes like compared to DV10 and QA23.
Well, we've been talking for a while about doing yeast experiments, and we had the Great Canadian Yeast Experiment up here, and I got a chance to participate in it, and the differences really are staggering. But the problem is, depending on what you're making, you're going to get different results. Like, you may be happiest with D47 for your traditionals, but when you add a different fruit, you may want RC212, and then when you add another fruit that's different from that, you may want K1V. So, every time you try something, you're going to want to experiment.
That's true. Although I can tell you this, if you can at least get to where you match a well-matched pair with the honey and the yeast strain, that's going to fail you way less, if even at all, more than with adding more adjuncts. If you at least get those two pieces right, you're starting already on a solid foundation. But there's a lot of Jim and I a few years ago, we did 25 yeast strains. We made 25 batches of the same must, and some of them absolutely sucked, where we didn't even bother to take tasting notes. We just wrote no in big capital letters on the papers. And then other ones, that we found different tiers where there might be 6 or 8 that were really good, and then the next 6 or 8 were okay, but not as good as the other ones. And then the third batch below that were, these suck, don't ever use this yeast again with this honey. But you might take them with the suck yeast with mesquite or star thistle or whatever, and it's terrible with that, and it might be the winner in the next honey. So gosh, I don't think there's ever comes a day when we should be doing yeast trials. I just think that's part of the deal.
Keep coming up with more yeasts, I mean, it's like
just the day when all your carboys are full.
So I could tell you this. I know two guys. They actually have some yeast strains that they've been hybriding here of late that are not for sale yet, that some people are using them. And Scott's Labs is asking for feedback. In other words, these are like some, unofficial trials. They're actually trying to make yeast strains that will tap out at a much lower ABV. So we can make a 10% ABV with residual sugar left over. So exactly when those become for sale to the public, I don't know, but I know that there's already some of that floating around town in certain towns.
Cool. All right, I think we're going to start to wind things up. We got people starting to drop off chat because it's probably their beddy by time too.
Yeah.
So guys, next week Ryan's going to be back with Yeast and Mead Part 2, including SIY additions and usage. So we'll see if we can lure Carvin on maybe for a bit too, and the two of you can talk turkey.
Now that'll be a long show.
I know, right? Well, Carmen's actually coming on later on in October. He wants to talk about traditionals, but I think it would be fun to have the two of you in there because he had a lot of good conversation to add in the chat. So that between the two of you, I think it's going to be good.
What's so fun is just talking to other guys that are all on the same wavelength. I feel quite privileged to have the friends that I do, and all of us are just geeks and can talk about this stuff for hours on end.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay. And I heard you say Shay is a friend of yours, so I'm going to leverage that because I really want Shay on the show, and I keep texting Shay and getting no response, probably because we're not friends. So.
Well, okay, I can manage that. Maybe, I don't know when you texted him, but right now, because it's Crush, he probably doesn't have time to even.
He's probably, Well, that's cool. He hasn't even seen. I don't think he's even seen the message I sent him. So because we're not friends on Facebook. So, yeah. If you're actually friends with him, could you just let him know I messaged him, and when he gets a minute to just let me know, and I could get him open dates. I would love to have him on the show.
Sure, I can hook you up. We can do that.
Awesome. Okay, so.
All right.
Bit of a plug, guys.
I'm going to go and let you go.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan.
All right.
Night, Ryan.
Good night, all. Take care. Bye-bye.
So, for those of you who may not have noticed, on half a dozen Facebook groups popped up today, the hotel reservations are now open for the Mazur Cup and the AMMA MeadCon. So if you go to meadcon.net/venue, that's VENUE, to get your reservations and discounted rates. There's also a lot of information about the hotel, travel to and from the hotel, how to get rental cars, and so on and so forth, shuttle buses and whatnot, so you can get your travel set up. And for those of you that are probably already asking, yes, tickets are going to be going on sale for the MeadCon shortly. I'm just waiting for approval from the ticket company right now. So we should have that hopefully within the next day or so. So never worry, it's coming. Upcoming events. Let's see. September 28th, Apis Meadery has a caramel apple release party. I really, really want to try that. September 29th, Orchid Cellar Meadery has their craft beverage festival at Red Heifer Winery. And way out in November, November 17th, Boss Meadery is having a progressive dinner. If you want to get your event on Got Mead Live, you just need to email me at gotmead@gotmead.com and let me know about it, and I'll get it on the show for you. So, and again, next week, Ryan, Yeast and Mead Part 2, including SIY editions, and I'm going to talk to Carvin and see if he's got the time, if he can come on. I don't know what his work schedule's like, so we'll cross our fingers. And that's all I got.
I'm good.
All right, and we'll see you guys next week for more book learning. Don't forget to do your homework.
Read your yeast handbook.
Read your yeast handbook, and we'll talk to y'all next week. Take care.
Night, everybody.